Welcome to The More Perfect Union, the podcast that offers real debate without the hate. I'm Wayne Campbell, and with me, as always, is Garth. Actually, I'm Rebecca Kushmiter. I am a progressive feminist from Kensington, Maryland, and tonight I am here with...
Kevin Kelton, a moderate Democrat from Santa Monica, California.
And DJ McGuire, a conservative feminist who has his own theory on what happened to former Navy Secretary Richard Spencer. Actually, no, I don't. I'll just mix them from column A, from column B, and column C. But I'm from Suffolk, Virginia. Which is a Navy town. So I'm sure everyone around you also has a theory on that. So yeah, let's jump right into the former Navy Secretary. Now, his name is Richard Spencer. He is not to be confused with the Nazi who was famously punched at Trump's inauguration. Not all Richard Spencers are Nazis, but the one who had been acting as Secretary of the Navy is no longer as of tonight. There was a bit of a kerfuffle. And DJ, why don't you start us off with this? Well, initially, this was all started when the Navy SEAL Chief Petty Officer Gallagher was charged with various war crimes. He was acquitted of the war crimes because the prosecution had some issues, but 9 of his fellow Navy SEALs testified against him, so that there were clearly some problems here. And the Navy was going to move to remove him from the SEALs. And Trump threw a fit and said, no, I don't want that. I don't want that to happen because, well, basically Donald Trump likes war criminals. He thinks they're tough. And within a couple of days, the Secretary of the Navy, Richard Spencer, who had initially and publicly said that he wanted at least some sort of review of whether Gallagher should remain in the SEALs, was out. He sends a letter saying effectively that he was out because he wanted to stand up for the rule of law, as he put it. Then the Defense Department puts out a statement saying, no, he's out because he went behind the Secretary of Defense's back and proposed a stitch-up with Trump, which led the Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper, to lose confidence in him. And then Trump tweeted saying that it was due to things like large cost overruns from past administrations' contracting procedures that were not addressed to his satisfaction. That was on a Trump tweet. So we have 3 different theories about why the Navy Secretary is no longer Navy Secretary, and I really don't know which of them are correct. All I know is Trump doesn't look good in any of them. Wanting a Navy SEAL who has lost the confidence of his unit and who has been charged with desecrating a body, which is basically the one verdict that did come down on him, to be pardoned, retain rank, and retire with full rank and honors, that's not typically the kind of thing presidents interfere in. I mean, normally one individual member of the military who is convicted of misconduct, the military handles it, whether or not he gets to retain rank. He's leaving the military no matter what. It sounds like he's going to retire. It's just a question of, does he get to say he retired as a Navy SEAL, or does he get busted down to whatever they were busting him down to?
But didn't Trump at some point want to even reverse that?
Oh, yeah. No, he doesn't think this guy did anything wrong. He shot a little girl, by the way. The guy shot, when he was a sniper, he shot an unarmed child.
Did he do it on Fifth Avenue?
No, maybe that was his mistake.
Because if you do it on Fifth Avenue, you can get away with it.
Yeah, I suspect we will hear a good deal more from this guy. I would be stunned if he doesn't try to turn this into a congressional run. This is not the last we've heard of him, unfortunately. He will retire on November 30. Is what I have seen reported, and then on December 1, he will launch either some sort of PAC or some sort of exploratory committee. He's running for something. Well, he's saying this was all retaliation against him, and that, there are people who just don't like him in the Navy, which may be true. It seems like there are people who don't like him.
I reached out to a friend of mine whose spouse is in the Navy. I said, what does your husband think of this? She goes, he did not actually know who the Secretary of the Navy was. So Richard Spencer has not made a deep impression on most of the Navy. They're not, it's not like when General Mattis retired and the entire military walked around in a haze of fear and dismay for a couple of weeks. So yeah, this is a strange situation, and it does not appear that we know who to believe.
Now, let me ask this. DJ, you might know this better than the two of us. What is the political aspect of this? I mean, obviously Trump is trying to accomplish something for himself. Is he simply appealing to the military vote and military families? Is there some other political play in this that I'm not quite seeing?
No. In fact, I would say most of the military personnel that I know are disgusted with the behavior of people like Gallagher. They think it reflects poorly on the military. They think it damages our reputation abroad. They think it hurts us with our allies. This is about what Donald Trump thinks is tough, what Donald Trump thinks is strong. He is once again.
But who is his audience?
His audience are the same rubes who don't understand this, the same people who like him confuse cruelty for strength. But I think in this case, it's not the audience as much as it is him himself. He thinks he's actually helping. He thinks this is actually better for the country. He really is that stupid in this situation.
Well, yeah, I think he sees Eddie Gallagher as being unfairly persecuted for just being like a tough guy who's willing to beat up terrorists.
Right. Wow.
Yeah.
For a better historical reference that you might understand, Kevin, Donald Trump is the kind of guy who would have given medals to the perpetrators of the My Lai massacre.
I was going to compare Eddie Gallagher to the staff at Abu Ghraib.
Oh God!
I mean, it's the same mindset. It's
that
the
too.
Dehumanizing of our enemies. Which the Geneva Conventions expressly forbids. But so it does not appear that Eddie Gallagher is going to go through the administrative hearing at this point because everything's so tainted. But who is going through hearings is still Donald Trump. The impeachment hearings rolled on this week. They appeared to drive through the Capitol in a bus. And a few people got tossed right on under that. Did anyone watch Gordon Sondland's testimony?
Oh my gosh, yes. Yes.
Kevin, what did you think? Wait, what were your big takeaways from Mr. Sondland, Ambassador Sondland?
Well, to use another historical reference, for me, the Sondland testimony was much like the John Dean testimony of 1974 or 73, 74. I'm not sure which year he testified. Everybody who is being impartial and open-minded understands what happened here, that Donald Trump was looking for an advantage against a presidential campaign opponent that he feared the most, that he saw an opportunity to start a scandal against Joe Biden to start to sully him up and drive up his negatives. And he put a little pressure on who he thought somebody that he could bully, and he got caught. The problem is that no one was ready to actually say there was a this for that, there was a quid pro quo. And the Democrats on the Intelligence Committee had actually moved away from trying to prove a quid pro quo because 80% of the audience didn't even understand what that meant. But Sondland came in and in no uncertain terms declared that there absolutely was a quid pro quo, that everybody that was working on this project knew about it, and that Donald Trump must have known about it too. Now, the only difference is in 1973 or 74, again, whenever the Dean testimony was, you had some fair-minded Republicans who could hear facts and go, oh, gee, I know I supported this guy, but he has done something that's very bad and potentially impeachable. We don't have that kind of we don't have that kind of Republican in today's Republican Party.
I agree with Kevin on the state of the Republican Party. I'm not so sanguine about Ambassador Sondland's testimony. There are times where he seemed a lot more like Howard Dean than John Dean, to be honest with you. he did explicitly say there was a quid pro quo regarding the White House meeting for the investigations. I thought that was particularly interesting was when Sondland said that the requirement was that they had to announce an investigation. They didn't actually have to conduct an investigation. That was key, and it was a sure sign that, as Fiona Hill testified the following day, it was a domestic political errand, which really should be a no-no. But Sondland, I didn't get the impression that Sondland was really ready to come completely clean. He tried to say that I didn't know that Burisma meant the Bidens, which Fiona Hill completely blew up in her testimony the next day. She said everybody knew that's what it meant. He said something to the effect of that he couldn't quite remember the call he couldn't remember the call that David Holmes overheard, and then David Holmes basically, testified the next day and said, yeah, this was the call, and it was obvious that everybody knew it was about the investigations that it met Biden. So the fact that Sondland tried to say that he didn't think Burisma meant the Bidens, that struck me as really disingenuous. And while, again, there were certain things that Sondland said that were helpful, he struck me more as slimy than completely credible, to be perfectly honest.
He struck me as kind of hapless. He seemed like a person who was unable to, synthesize context. Like, he thinks of himself as a mover and a shaker, and he really wanted to get that meeting. He wanted to get that photo op. Like, he's talking about the Ambassador Bolton meeting where he went out and took nice pictures afterwards. That's because he wasn't able to read the room. He had no stinking clue that everything was on fire and he was walking through the flames. He's like, I'm getting the meeting. I'm doing the thing. I bought this ambassadorship and now I'm doing it. Look at me. I'm important. I can swear with Donald Trump on the phone. I'm the greatest. And he just didn't put together all the pieces to see the whole puzzle. And he stands in such a stark contrast to all these subject matter experts with years of experience and study behind them that he's just this rich guy who feels like he's a mover and a shaker, but he doesn't actually know what he's doing.
I think we should not forget the testimony of Laura Cooper, who testified after Sondland, because she revealed something very important. She revealed that the Ukrainians were aware there was something wrong with the military aid on the 25th of July. She testified.
Everyone. Yeah, if you think about this from a logical perspective, when did Congress pass the budget with the military aid? And it was like in May, right?
It was in the spring sometime.
Okay, so it was in the spring. If you are Ukraine and you are counting on U.S. military aid, you are following the defense appropriations process very closely. You know to the cent what the dollar figures in that bill are. Your ambassador has been meeting with the head of the appropriations subcommittee on defense issues. So you know that money has been allocated. And you know that the Pentagon is going through their review process, and you know that it hasn't been released. And that is setting off alarm bells all over your government. Everybody who says, well, how could the Ukrainians know, are being remarkably stupid about this, because there's no way the Ukrainians wouldn't know. This is money they needed, and they knew probably to the penny how much they were supposed to get and when.
Right.
Absolutely.
And the fact that Laura, and again, Ms. Cooper specifically testified on the 25th, on the day of the call, just after the call, her staff heard from the Ukrainian embassy wondering what was the deal with that money. So they knew something was wrong, and they knew it much earlier than Devin Nunes et al. want us to believe. So there were that was something very important that came out Wednesday evening and wasn't hyped as much, in part because the stuff on the testimony on Thursday, which we really haven't gotten to in full, was just so awesome because Nunes and Jordan and Castor, the Republican lawyer, all got jackhammered so wonderfully by Hill and Holmes.
Yeah, Hill and Holmes are very good. But this money was more like your paycheck that you are expecting to clear on Friday morning every other week. It's not like, the check you think you might get for your bar mitzvah and you have to act surprised when it shows up.
Good analogy.
Thank you. I just thought of that. So speaking of Fiona Hill and David Holmes, again, with the subject matter experts, with the people who have spent their lifetimes working on European diplomatic issues, who do know the context, who do know the history, and who can put together the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle in record time. And we heard from them on Thursday, and neither of them were there to play. They had really clearly learned from what the process and the structure of the hearings was going to look like. And neither of them were coming into this ready to be tripped up. What did you guys think? I only saw pieces of those hearings.
I thought they were both incredible advocates for the side that we believe in, which is that there was a quid pro quo, and it went all the way up to the top of the White House.
Yeah, I think the Hill, and I watched a lot more of the Hill and Holmes testimony than I did the Sondland testimony, and I was particularly struck by Ms. Hill's very firm attempt to be a straight shooter. She was not going to mess around with Republicans who stretched the truth. She was not going to mess around with Democrats who tried to stretch the truth either. But there were two things in Fiona Hill's testimony that I think really stuck out to me. One was in her opening statement where she said there are people on this committee who are parroting Russian propaganda, and you really need to stop. I think that needed to be said. And it was still just so forceful and so dramatic. And then it was when Castor tried to push her on Ambassador Sondland, and again, this is one of the reasons why I don't like Sondland, on his assertion that Hill was upset at him and there was some kind of screaming match and he didn't know what the problem was. And, Fiona Hill, in her perfect, British way of sounding like you are helping someone when you're really just burying them, said, well, initially I was upset at him. I don't remember screaming or anything like that, but I was upset at him that he wasn't going through regular channels. But then I heard his testimony yesterday and I understood where he was coming from. And yes, he had a point. He wasn't going through regular channels because he had orders from up above to do a domestic political errand, and that's not what we at the National Security Staff are supposed to do. So of course he didn't involve us, and that made perfect sense. And the Republican lawyer was such a fool that he didn't realize that he had just stepped on a landmine and blown off his own leg. It was unbelievable. Yeah.
What she and David Holmes proved, and what, Ambassador Taylor and some of the others earlier in this process have proved, we have the best and the brightest working in our United States diplomatic corps. And I, every once in a while, give shout outs to diplomats because I think the work they do is extraordinary. And what they have to know, what they have to manage is beyond the work most of us ever get to do in our lifetimes. And so I'm heartened seeing how good they really are at their jobs. And the other thing is people are talking about, Fiona Hill being this incredible, extraordinary woman. Yeah, she is. She's better educated and has spent more time in her profession than most of us. But I got to tell you, there are zillions of women just as strong and just as cool and just as collected. And if you haven't seen them before, it's only because you haven't been looking, guys. Yeah, not you guys, guys in general.
Yeah, but as you are absolutely right. But I don't think any of them have that County Durham accent.
No. Well, except all the ones in County Durham. Fiona Hill's mom is probably like, So
I want to throw in something here, just not a sideline, but I want to take this down what you guys will probably consider a rabbit hole, but that's okay. As you know, I'm one of those people that disagrees with the official findings of the Mueller investigation that there was no provable conspiracy. I think anyone who has read the indictment of Roger Stone and then followed it up by listening to the evidence that came out in his trial, I just don't understand why it's apparent to me and not to everyone else that Roger Stone was the official conduit for the Trump campaign, or at least for Donald Trump himself, to WikiLeaks, who was involved in trying to publish dirt on Hillary Clinton. The parallels to this case are unbelievable. It's like a modus operandi Trump finds someone who he trusts, who is not in official government or in the case of 2016 on the official campaign, and he sends them out to dig up dirt that they can somehow get released or published or announced by some adversary out there that is going to do their bidding and drive up negatives on their opponent. And I know this isn't going to happen, but my wish is that someone on the Judiciary Committee had the balls to go, we're not just going to talk about Ukraine. We're not just going to talk about obstruction of Congress or obstruction of justice. Because the reason that the whole Ukraine thing is important, especially in the case of the CrowdStrike craziness, is because they still know that there's heat and smoke and fire in the Russian thing, and they're afraid it's going to come out.
Yeah, I agree with you.
I would say two things, though, in defense of Robert Mueller. One, unlike Rudy Giuliani, who has claimed that he is Donald Trump's personal attorney, and Trump has acknowledged that, neither Donald Trump nor Roger Stone ever acknowledged any official or personal ties to each other. We all kind of knew
whoa, what?
No,
what?
Roger Stone was, quote, fired, unquote, from the Trump campaign. And so while they were obviously
after a 30-year friendship that they had.
Right, they were obviously friends, but there was no official client, employee, supervisor,
and that was the
relationship.
purpose of it. As I've said on this podcast before, that was subterfuge. That was to create plausible deniability. That's why they created that public thing of, was he fired? Did he quit? Did he quit? Was he fired? And Roger Stone went on all the cable news channels so that everybody knew that Roger Stone was not officially on the campaign.
And we both understand that. However, Mueller's exact phraseology was he did not have enough evidence to establish a conspiracy between the Trump campaign and the Russian government. The
Russian government. It's on the Russian government side that I think he might have been right, but the Russian government worked through WikiLeaks. But we're talking about two different things. But Stone was in constant communication with Steve Bannon and others in the Trump campaign.
We're in violent agreement there. We're in violent agreement there. The other thing to remember is that Mueller also said in his investigation that there were people who lied to him and people who withheld evidence. And had those people not withheld evidence or lied to him, he might have reported something different. He specifically said that. Now, getting back to this, what we have to, and you're right, it was effectively the same playbook. The only difference now is that instead of it being the Trump campaign, where it was more difficult to establish ties and relationships, and it was more difficult, you can't say a presidential candidate abuses power because in theory they don't have any. The president of the United States clearly has power to abuse, and Donald Trump abused it. It is much easier, and this is the one thing Donald Trump never understood, is that when you are a public official, the rules really are different for you. He has never understood that. He still doesn't understand that, and it will be his undoing. Because even if he could get away with what he got away with as a presidential candidate, whether he should have or not is not the issue, he couldn't get away with it as president of the United States because there's more official records involved, there's actual power involved, and there are things like congressional appropriations that he could not touch as a candidate because he was not physically able to, but as president, he was physically able to do it, but he was legally obligated not to, and that's where he's gotten himself into trouble.
And apparently now there's been, the sources have told, I believe it was the Washington Post just tonight, that there was a White House review of all of this shortly after the call happened, where they were trying to find a legal rationale for withholding the military aid. And anonymous sources are saying, Mick Mulvaney was trying to figure out a way to say, no, it was fine. And that's why they were playing a shell game with staff at OMB. And after it was clear that Trump was withholding military aid or delaying military aid, they were trying to create a legal framework for him to have done that, after it had actually happened. There were enough people in the White House who knew that it was illegal. The White House counsel's office was the one investigating this, that there's no question that what he did was wrong, that it was irregular, that it was not something presidents typically get to do. They knew it, and they were already building a defense in real time.
But I have the sexier breaking news. This is from ABC News. It says the House Intelligence Committee is in possession of audio and video recordings and photographs provided to the committee by Lev Parnas.
I know. Isn't that one cool?
One of the two Ukrainians who worked with Rudolph the dumbass lawyer. And those things are now, the House Intelligence Committee is perusing through all of that stuff. And we have to remember, Lev Parnas also has said that he helped Devin Nunes, yes, that Devin Nunes, meet Ukrainian prosecutor Shokin and the various other folks in the Ukraine who were peddling this nonsense in the first place. And
Devin Nunes has a $57,000 travel bill to Ukraine.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, that was new tonight too, that he and at least one staffer flew to Ukraine and spent $57,000 on the trip. And I suppose Devin Nunes could have had another official reason for being there, but I kind of doubt it.
Yeah, I don't think so. Unless he was trying to find other cows to sue.
Well, I was going to say, what all these people need is maybe some help, a little bit of therapy, a little bit of better help to convince them to listen to their conscience, listen to their better angels. Kevin, what can we do to help these folks?
Well, the problem is, Rebecca, these are busy people. They don't have time to go to therapy sessions with expensive therapists in Washington, D.C. Yeah, well, if only there was an online application that they could, wait a second. I think there is. No, of course we're kidding around, but our newest sponsor is a company called BetterHelp, and BetterHelp.com creates or makes available to you online counseling at a very reasonable cost. Is there something that's interfering with your happiness or preventing you from achieving your goals? Well, BetterHelp online counseling could be there for you. You can connect with your professional counselor in a safe and private online environment, which is quite convenient, and you can get help on your own time at your own pace. You can schedule secure phone or video sessions, plus chat or text with your therapist whenever is convenient for you. They have 3,000 licensed professionals who are specialized in depression, anger, stress, anxiety, relationships, sleeping disorders, trauma, and anything you share with these professionals will, of course, be strictly confidential. So, by the way, you could also talk about things like LGBT matters, self-esteem, family conflicts. So if you're not happy in your personal life and you just, for whatever reason, maybe your insurance doesn't cover it, or maybe you haven't had the time, or maybe you've tried therapy and it didn't click with that therapist, that counselor, that psychiatrist, and you never got around to following up. Well, maybe it's time you did. So think about BetterHelp.com. They are available on desktop, mobile, web applications, Android, and iOS apps. You can schedule your video and phone session generally once a week or possibly more if your therapist thinks about it. And financial aid help is available to those who qualify. It's secure, it's convenient, it's professional, and it is affordable. It is not a crisis helpline, but these people are there to help you. So here's what we call the call to action in our biz.
Our biz.
So what we want you to do is, listen, seriously, if you think that this might be a service that you're thinking about trying, BetterHelp has a special offer just for you. If you are a More Perfect podcast listener, you can get 10% off. And obviously you are, because you're listening to me right now. So you can get, even if you're not listening, even if you're ignoring me, you can get 10% off your first month on BetterHelp by using the discount code MOREPERFECT. So go to betterhelp.com/moreperfect for your 10% discount today. That's betterhelp.com/moreperfect.
Anyway, so here we are back talking about politics now that we've gotten the help we need from all the talking about politics. Seriously, Thanksgiving is coming. We all need to maybe
that'll
the
require therapy.
Yeah, I was going to say,
after
let's
that.
shore up our defenses before we have to sit across the gravy boat from people with whom we vehemently disagree but are also related. So, we just had our November debate. That was on Wednesday night. I did not watch it because I was busy reading the Anonymous book, trying to learn all about that. What did you guys take the time?
I watched it with Jessica, and we went over to the house of my cousin Steve and his fiancee Samantha, a wonderful couple. And we all watched it together, but it was very frustrating because Steve is like the greatest guy in the world. I love him dearly, but he likes to stop the tape and then say, what did you think of that answer? Or he likes to expound on it. And so what should have been a 2-hour debate was turning into a 5-hour event for us to the point where we had to leave before I actually saw the end of the debate. I love Steve and I loved the event, but I'm not sure I could do that again.
So they finally cut the debate down to a manageable length of time and Steve ruined it for you.
And Steve, yeah.
Steve just completely blew it.
I had taped the debate. I DVR'd it, and at some point I was going to watch it. I was going to try to watch it, and then I found a perfect excuse not to watch it, which we'll get to in a little bit. Go on.
Well, you guys have to watch these things. We do a podcast. We talk about it. How can you not watch it?
I watched the first debate, and I feel like that set me up. So Pete Buttigieg had seen a big surge going into it, and people were saying, is he the new front runner? And so that always draws fire. Kevin, did you actually see that? Were people coming after Mayor Pete for the first time?
Coming after, there were a couple of clashes. Obviously, there's always one or two clashes between people. I thought Mayor Buttigieg had a very strong debate. Actually, I'll tell you, I'll handicap it for you. I thought Kamala Harris, who, as you guys know, I have been somewhat down on the last couple of months. I thought she had a strong debate. I thought Andrew Yang had a very strong debate. He always impresses me. I don't think he will get anywhere near the White House, or for that matter, the Democratic nomination, but he's an impressive man with some very interesting ideas. And
I think he'll be heading up a blue ribbon commission in a Democratic administration, but I don't think he'll be president.
Yeah. And I thought Joe Biden had a good debate, but then again, people will say I'm a partisan. It's interesting. After the debate, I went to HuffPo, and their top headline was something to the effect of Biden implodes, because there was one embarrassing moment where he was talking about his support in the African American community, and he meant to say, I have been endorsed by the first African American woman to become a U.S. senator, but he said by the only African American woman to become a U.S. senator. And Kamala Harris is standing right there going, excuse me. and Cory Booker, Cory Booker, I kind of like him, but in this campaign, he's on my shit list because he just gets, he's so kind of condescending, and he loves to laugh at Joe, like Joe is this crazy uncle of his that you can't believe what comes out of his mouth. And it's so disrespectful and condescending. But anyways, did people come after Mayor Pete? Maybe a little bit. I didn't think it was any more so than any other debate, but he shot up in my rankings. He is now my second choice. If for some reason Biden does not get the nomination, I will be supporting Mayor Buttigieg. So
if we had ranked choice voting, it would be Biden, Buttigieg.
Yes. Yeah. And Elizabeth Warren, who I used to like, is slipping down for me, because she's a one-note candidate. She says the same things over and over and over. And I understand that repetition is an important part of communication, but she is making it ad nauseum.
Now, did you guys read the article that came out in the Atlantic this weekend about Joe Biden? Did you guys see that one, or am I the only one who gave that a close read?
No, I read it. It's about his stuttering problem, and it's been written about before, but this one was a kind of expansive study of that issue. Yeah.
It may have been written about before, but it was something that had escaped me. I didn't realize that he had a significant stutter problem as a child, and he still continues to struggle with it. And, a cynic might look at that as an attempt to do damage control on some of the problems he's had in public speaking on this campaign. But the thing that I took from it that I found interesting was the author of the article is also somebody who stutters and was coming at it from personal perspective and was feeling a real kinship with Joe Biden. And I think I said this on Facebook today. One of the things I have liked so much about this Democratic primary is that no matter who you are, you can see yourself in these candidates. If you're gay, there's somebody who represents you. If you are a person of color, there's somebody who represents you. If you are a woman, if you are a man, if you are old, if you are young, there is somebody who is speaking from an experience similar to yours. And Joe Biden is willing to say, to some degree at least, if you are a person who has struggled with expressing themselves because of factors beyond your control, which speaks to people with speech impediments, it speaks to people who are neurologically atypical, it speaks to any number of issues. Joe Biden comes from that. He has been a part of that. And unfortunately, he comes at it from the perspective of a generation that tried to hide any sort of weakness, but that doesn't mean he didn't have it.
Yeah, very good point. And I want to build on what you just said, Rebecca. I agree thoroughly with what you just said. One of the things that impresses me about Vice President Biden is that in the article, and whenever this has come up when I've seen interviews, he actually downplays it. He doesn't try to use it as a crutch to explain what's going on with him. He actually says, I struggled with that. It was a problem in my life, but I dealt with that a long time ago, and I don't think it's an issue anymore. He's actually not trying to use it for political purposes, which makes me respect him even more. But the other thing that I'd like to add is whether that's really what's going on or whether it's a combination. Yes, he might have a stutter, but there's also senior moments going on. He did a long sit-down interview with Don Lemon this past week on CNN. And, of course, Biden has done other forums, town halls, other interviews. When you see him in those situations, he doesn't have those quote-unquote gaffe moments, those senior moments. He's articulate. He's well-reasoned. He's confident and strong. And I have a feeling, the big issue with Biden is everybody says, look, yes, he's got the experience. Yes, he could, on day one, he knows the job. But if you put him up against Donald Trump and in a debate, a national presidential debate, he has one of those moments like he did against Kamala Harris a couple of times. Is that going to truly implode his campaign? I don't think so. Even in that scenario, even if in a national general election, presidential debate, Joe Biden happens to put his foot in his mouth, which is probably at least a 50-50 possibility. Let's face it. I don't think that the country is going to go, oh my God, we can't vote for him. He did this. I think just like the fact that Donald Trump does certain things that are baked into the cake and people accept them about him, I think that those people who are not already turned off to Joe Biden understand that sometimes he says the wrong thing or he gets a little confused. And a general election campaign is more than just the 3 debates that these candidates are going to have. And there'll be plenty of opportunity for Joe Biden to express himself confidently and clearly during a 60 or 90-day presidential campaign. So I'm not concerned about that. I wish he was the Joe Biden that he was in the 1990s or the early 2000s, but we have to pick from the field of candidates that we have, as I've said many times on this program. And of these candidates, I still think Joe Biden has the best chance to win Pennsylvania, the best chance to win Michigan and Wisconsin, and possibly even take one of the other Rust Belt or, Florida, North Carolina, Arizona. He possibly could win one of those. Pete Buttigieg, I hope, has that capacity, but he hasn't proved it yet.
I would say, for folks who wonder about how Biden would be in a debate against Donald Trump, go back and watch his performance against Sarah Palin and go back and watch his performance against Paul Ryan. And I mean, Sarah
aced.
Sarah Palin's a moron. And so all he had to do was patiently wait for her to stop talking and then say something normal. But Paul Ryan, who actually knows stuff, Biden was able to take his answers apart, deconstruct them and reconstruct them. And he was very good in that debate. And I think he would be able to bring that to the forefront against Donald Trump. Now, the other thing, and I've told this story before, I'm almost sure of it. My husband got to go to the 2016 Democratic convention, and he was seated up above and behind Joe Biden when he gave his speech. And I don't know if you guys remember Biden's speech, but he was electrifying. He was so good. He had the entire room in the palm of his hand. And I was like, oh man, he is the real deal. We missed an opportunity. I mean, I'm all about Hillary, but listen to this guy. He was our other choice. And it's a shame that this wasn't his year. And Scott told me later, my husband, he said, Biden's prompter wasn't moving. And I said, what do you mean? He's like, his prompter wasn't moving. He was speaking off the cuff. He went completely off script at points in that speech and just started to talk. And he has that kind of charisma and that depth of knowledge that he can tap into. So when he's not having to fend off a lot of stuff from a lot of different sides and he can focus a little bit, he's very, very good. And he's very, very appealing.
That's true. One thing no one has ever said about Joe Biden is that he's ever at a loss for words.
No.
You're listening to The More Perfect Union. 9 out of 10 experts agree that listening to The More Perfect Union makes you smarter, taller, prettier, have thicker hair, and makes you a better dancer. The More Perfect Union, the podcast for everyone.
But DJ, there's another choice in the field this week.
Yes,
yeah, dude.
There is indeed. As of Sunday, Mayor Mike made it official that he is running for president. He is still staying away from the first 4 states, which tells me he is essentially presenting himself as the Biden backstop still. That if Biden falls apart, then he is ready to take up the centrist and the moderate mantle. We can argue the wisdom of that later. In my case, however, I had never assumed that Mike Bloomberg would actually run for president because he's talked about it before and chosen not to. And in fact, he earlier said he wouldn't. So that was the reason why I went with and stuck with Congressman John Delaney. I just assumed Mike Bloomberg was not going to run because he said he wasn't going to run. He has now changed his mind. And frankly, I am now changing my mind. Just by the fact that he is running, he is now the candidate with the most experience in an elected executive position in the entire field, including the incumbent. He has 12 years as mayor of New York City, which for some of us is still the second toughest job in America. And yes, that may be tri-state bias, but I really don't care because I grew up in the tri-state area and I know how difficult it is to be mayor of New York City. And Kevin can attest to this as well because he grew up in America.
Yeah. I can attest.
So the fact of the matter is, again, he has done it for 12 years. He has run and won 3 elections. He is the only person in the history of Greater New York to win a majority of the vote in 3 elections for mayor of New York City while never being a Democratic nominee. Nobody else ever did that. Even Fiorello LaGuardia needed a divided opposition to win with 40% of the vote in 1933. So the fact of the matter is, he's not just another billionaire. Basically, for me, because he is now in the race, Mayor Mike is the candidate in whom I have the most confidence to succeed as president of the United States, and it's not even close for me. I have always liked him. I have always thought he was a good mayor, and I am convinced he will be a good president in a way I'm not convinced about anyone else running.
Okay, so Bloomberg is in, Deval Patrick is in. I don't think much is going to happen in this campaign until the next debate, which is sometime in, I guess, mid to late December.
We're going to have a pre-Christmas debate? Man.
Yeah, they do.
That's it.
And then 4 or 5 of those people, I forget how many senators, active senators are running for president. They're going to have to come off the campaign trail for that Senate trial. It's going to shake things up.
Yeah, well, Mitch McConnell is planning for it to shake things up. He is hoping to keep all of those people off the campaign trail on purpose for really his own amusement. But there's also the fact that we don't know yet that the House is going to rest their case on this. It's not entirely clear whether or not Intel is going to hand this off to judiciary.
Oh, but I agree with you that they still might have another hearing or two But at some point, I think certainly in the next couple of weeks,
well,
it gets handed off to judiciary.
Yes.
And then I don't think they're going to make a big showing of it. They may have a couple of days of hearings and then they're going to vote on articles of impeachment. Don't you agree?
I would agree with that. But they have a very convenient break this week for Thanksgiving. And so they don't have to make any decisions. But that doesn't mean that Adam Schiff and Nancy Pelosi and the rest of the leadership on this process won't be huddled the entire time trying to figure out, are we going to get a court decision on someone like Bolton? Are we going to bring in any more witnesses? What else is going on? Because they've had their investigators on this for weeks, and the investigators at the staff level haven't stopped. So there may be more coming in that we haven't heard about yet. They definitely want to review whatever they've gotten from Lev Parnas, and some of that is held up in New York. So there is more happening, and they fortunately have a week where they aren't really called upon to do anything because theoretically they're home in their districts for district work period.
Right. And I want to point one thing out that once this goes to the Judiciary Committee, that the Intelligence Committee is shut down, and or once they vote articles of impeachment, that stops everything else in the House. The fact of the matter is, and now I'm using a term that DJ uses frequently.
I actually want to change the name of the podcast to The Fact of the Matter.
To The Fact of the Matter is. That's not a bad idea.
Yeah, that's kind of who we are.
So my point is that the Intelligence Committee can still hold hearings after articles of impeachment have been voted on. And more articles of impeachment can be voted on by the Judiciary Committee later, after they have, sent 2 or 3 to the Senate. So Mitch McConnell has a very tricky balancing act to walk here, because if he delays too long in getting to that Senate trial, he could end up with more articles of impeachment to deal with. And by the way, going back to something that I talked about in the first half of the program, one of the other reasons that I'm hoping that the Judiciary Committee does go back and look at the Mueller investigation and pulls some of the charges from there and creates a separate article of impeachment about obstruction of justice or obstruction of Congress is because I don't want this to be a short trial in the Senate. I want them to have to cover an array of charges. And that's why if I was in the House, I would be pushing to get as many charges. I would be putting emoluments in there. Anything that is a legitimate impeachable offense that they could get 218 votes for, I would create a separate article of impeachment, because the longer that trial goes on and the more bad media coverage that Donald Trump gets, I'll be dancing on the tables again.
Yep. No, those tables. And I've been saying for a while that I think this should go into 2020. I don't think there's any reason not to make this.
I think NBC should pick it up as a series.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It could be a comedy series. It could be a reality show. It could be
instead of The Apprentice, it's The Impeachment starring Donald Trump.
But, we are not the only people in the world who hold elections.
We're not.
It's true. We're not. Hong Kong held local and regional elections this weekend. And I believe, DJ, that the Chinese Communist Party got spanked. Is that how you would characterize it?
Yes, I would. The pro-democracy forces have already won some 80% of the seats declared for the district elections. And these, for those who don't understand, this is the equivalent of your local city council elections. They handle garbage disposal and various other minimal local services. So normally these are things that Hong Kong voters themselves really don't pay much attention to, but this time they saw it as an opportunity to tell the Chinese Communist Party what to go do with itself, and that's exactly what they've done. The pro-democracy forces have again won about 80% of the seats that have declared so far. They've already won an absolute majority of all of the seats that are out there, and there's still about 100 that haven't been declared yet. And it is just a dramatic showing that Hong Kongers are not happy with what the CCP wants to do to them. They are not happy with what the CCP wants to do to democracy as limited as it is in Hong Kong, and they are not going away.
I'm just so heartened to see it. I love it anywhere that democracy takes hold in the streets. I think the protesters in Hong Kong and the way they've organized has been nothing short of inspirational.
And it says something that Congress has passed almost unanimously a congressional bill that would essentially punish Chinese communists individually and as a whole, if they continue to muck around with democracy in Hong Kong. And we are now sitting here wondering if Donald Trump will actually sign it or veto it. The fact that we actually have to ask that question says everything you need to know about Donald Trump and what a disaster he is for America.
Yeah, and how he feels about democracy. But we are, as I referenced with Congress, we're going into Thanksgiving recess. So let's take a moment. Instead of talking about what we're thankful for, let's talk about what we want to eat, because really it's all about the dinner. And what is, Kevin, your favorite thing that will be on your Thanksgiving table? What's your favorite dish?
Well, my favorite thing that will be on this year's Thanksgiving table, last year, Jess and I hosted our first Thanksgiving together. Jess made a turkey, and I don't know that she'd ever made one before, but we got a recipe from her mom, and there was a gravy that I can't describe, but it was fantastic. And I'm kind of excited, as good as it was last year. Jess's mom is coming down this year with Jess's stepdad, and we're all having Thanksgiving together, and the mom is making it for us. It should be even better. So I'm very excited about that.
DJ, what about you? What are you looking forward to eating this week?
Probably, honestly, more than anything else, probably zuppa toscana at Olive Garden with my son the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. Don't get me wrong, I do enjoy the spread that is available on Thanksgiving, but that spread usually also comes with some of my in-laws who are quite a few of them are MAGA fools. I don't have that issue when I go to Olive Garden with my son.
Let me ask you guys this. I hope this doesn't turn out to be too sad, but hopefully it'll be funny. What was your most pitiful or least wonderful Thanksgiving?
What was almost my least wonderful Thanksgiving, it actually turned out to be my most wonderful Thanksgiving. I was supposed to eat with a friend's family, and my friend up and abandoned me, I think for a boy, because we were in our 20s and we abandoned each other for boys in those days. And I was sitting there like on the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. I had nowhere to go. I had not made travel plans, and literally my entire extended family was going to be in Woodstock, New York at my aunt and uncle's house. So I called my aunt. I told her my plan. I told her not to tell anyone else because they were going to stop me. And I only had one day off. So I got up at like 3 a.m. on Thanksgiving. I drove from DC to Woodstock, New York. I showed up in time for breakfast. I stayed through dinner. I slept for a couple hours, and I turned around and drove back to DC and made it in time for work at 9:00 on Friday morning. But it was one of my best Thanksgivings because I got to walk in and surprise everybody and just have a wonderful time and a wonderful meal with all the people I loved. But man, was I tired after that happened.
Well, I'll tell you mine. Actually, I have two, and they both relate to my brothers. When I first moved out from New York after college to Los Angeles, that first year, it was just me and my brother Bruce for Thanksgiving. My brother Bobby, who's a comedian, was on the road. My parents were still back east. And so Bruce and I, we didn't want to cook dinner. So we went to a diner out here called Norm's. It's one of those 24-hour diners that you go to usually when you've been drinking too much and you've got to sober up before you go home. And you can only imagine the clientele that was in Norm's on Thanksgiving evening. And Bruce and I sat there eating, the $7.50 Thanksgiving, special that Norm's was providing, thinking, what happened to our lives that we ended up at this place on this day? What did we do wrong?
Was there an actual Norm? Was there a guy named Norm working the counter at the diner?
Not at working there. There probably is a guy who owned it. It was a chain of diners.
Gotcha.
I think there might only be one left in Los Angeles now, maybe two, but it was fairly famous in the 70s.
Yeah, because I'm picturing George Wendt here. And
yeah, probably. That's probably what Norm looked like.
I know I am looking forward to this week, the unveiling of the hellscape of Melania's psyche that usually manifests itself in her Christmas decorations. You go back and look at Christmas decorations past, and you will see the desolate and bleak mindset of our First Lady in the White House. Kevin, what's on your agenda for the coming week?
Well, I wanted to ask you, I never asked you, what is your favorite Thanksgiving dish, or what will you be serving that's special to you?
Oh, for me, it's all about the stuffing. Last year I innovated. I put Trader Joe's everything bagel seasoning in the stuffing, and it was the most wonderful thing I've ever eaten in my life. And I could actually just get rid of everything else on the table and eat only that.
Okay, I have to go to Orbitz right now and find out when there are flights on Thursday morning to Maryland.